Would you like my review? This is terrible. You don't write stories again. You suck at it.
Don't worry, I won't!
The Terminator franchise is a fascinating car crash. It's a perfect case study in how Hollywood, that glorious soulless factory of focus-grouped dreams, reacts to success.
This could really come in useful.
We were blessed with one perfect original, one definitive heartbreaking molten steel-infused sequel, one ending so absolute it should have been legally protected by a restraining order. And then, because we live in a world where quarterly earnings reports speak louder than artistic integrity, we got decades of sequels desperately trying to lobotomize that ending. It's almost poetic, isn't it? A franchise about a machine that won't stop until you're dead, turned into a franchise that won't stop until your childhood nostalgia is dead.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
Now, I've spent way too much time staring at these movies. I've lived through practical effects highlights of the 80s and the Khaleesi trying to be Sarah Connor lows of the 2010s. Today, we aren't doing a boring chronological breakdown. No, we're doing a ranked analysis. I'll go from the absolute peak of human achievement to the radioactive corporate slop, and I think that one of my picks might really surprise you. We're going to dive deep into the technical mastery of James Cameron and compare it to the bland CGI-infused trash. So buckle up, let's get to the bottom of this downfall, where it went right, where it went wrong, and all the pointless DLC in between. Let's revisit the ranking of the Terminator franchise.
Relax. Okay, just a tire.
If you want to understand why every subsequent Terminator movie feels like a hollowed out husk of a cinematic dream, you have to look at Terminator 2: Judgment Day. It is the Mona Lisa of action cinema. It is the peak, the standard, the gold bar against which all other blockbusters are measured and found wanting. But T2 is also the franchise's biggest problem. It's so good, so definitive, and so final that it effectively salted the earth behind it. James Cameron built a sequel that argues against the very existence of sequels. In 1991, he was at the height of his mad scientist phase. He had a $100 million budget, the largest in history at the time, and he used every cent of it to bridge the gap between old school Hollywood craftsmanship and the digital frontier. To give you an idea of the scale, the budget for the opening credits alone was equal to the entire budget of the first film. That is the kind of screw you money that only a visionary who knows he's about to change the world gets to spend. And while modern audiences are used to seeing $300 million movies that look like they were rendered on a soggy potato, T2 still looks better than 99% of the CGI-infused slop Disney puts out today. Why? Because Cameron understood the balance. So did Stan Winston too. In today's industry, a machine is just a bunch of weightless pixels dancing across a green screen. But in T2, Skynet's foot soldiers had weight. They had presence. Winston's team built full-scale animatronic endoskeletons. They built rigs that sat on the shoulders of puppeteers to give the T-800 that heavy mechanical, I'm going to crush your skull gait. When you see the T-800 repairing its arm or removing its scalp to get to the chip, you're looking at a physical object interacting with real light. Winston's imperfect movement is exactly what makes it terrifying. Modern CGI is too smooth. It lacks the jitter, the friction, the mechanical struggle of a machine trying to mimic biology. And while T2 is credited with the CGI revolution, people forget there are only about 40 computer-generated shots in the entire film. Everything else was practical. The T-1000's head splitting open, a mechanical model, the frozen T-1000 shattering, practical. Even the liquid metal splashes were often handcrafted squibs. It's that tangible, sweaty reality that makes the action feel dangerous. When a truck flips in a storm drain in T2, you feel the vibration in your teeth. When a truck flips in a Marvel movie, you feel like you're watching someone else play a video game while you wait for your DoorDash to arrive. And then we have Robert Patrick as the T-1000. If Arnold Schwarzenegger created the screen persona of the unstoppable machine, Robert Patrick perfected the infiltrator. He studied sharks. He trained himself to run with his mouth closed, breathing only through his nose, so he wouldn't look like he was winded. He practiced shooting without blinking. He played a predator disguised as a polite civil servant. He was lean, fast, and terrifyingly efficient, a direct contrast to Arnold's massive industrial-era frame. It was a casting stroke of genius that proved you don't need a bigger body to be a bigger threat. If you want to talk about why T2 feels so much thicker than modern blockbusters, you have to look at the forbidden footage. The scenes Cameron cut for time that actually contain the film's intellectual DNA. Specifically, the learning mode scene. In the extended cut, we see John and Sarah literally opening the T-800's skull to flip a switch on its CPU. This scene reveals a terrifying bit of world building. Skynet is so afraid of its own creations that it ships them with their learning mode set to read only. It doesn't want its soldiers to think, it wants them to be slaves. By flipping that switch, John is not only repairing a robot, he's liberating an individual. This is the moment the T-800 starts being a person. It's also where we see the absolute peak of practical ingenuity. That scene in the garage where they're working on the head in front of a mirror, that's not a mirror. There was no CGI reflection. It was a hole in the wall with a dummy head, and on the other side, Linda Hamilton's twin sister, Leslie, mirrored Linda's movements in real time. It's a low-tech solution to a high-tech problem, and it looks more convincing than any $200 million digital face replacement nowadays. Even the sound of T2 is a masterclass in show don't tell. Sound designer Gary Ridstrom used the organic sounds to ground the abstract. You know that unsettling schloop sound when the T-1000 walks through metal bars? That's the sound of dog food sliding out of a can. The sound of the T-1000 transforming? Industrial flour and water mixed into a slurry. Ridstrom used the mundane to make the impossible feel tactile. When the T-1000 is hit, it sounds like a physical deforming of matter. And we can't ignore the sheer balls-to-the-wall risk of the stunts. In the final highway chase, a helicopter, piloted by the legendary Chuck Tamburo, actually flies under a freeway overpass at 60 miles per hour. The camera crew was so terrified they refused to film it, so James Cameron grabbed the camera and stood on the skids himself to get the shot. That's the difference. In a modern sequel, that's a digital asset in a virtual environment. In T2, it was a real man flying a real machine under a real bridge, risking real death to give the audience a real thrill. But T2 is a masterpiece not only because of the explosions or the liquid metal, it also has an emotional center that the later sequels completely ignored in favor of cameo simulators and nostalgia baiting. The heart of this movie is the relationship between John Connor and the T-800. In a stroke of brilliant recontextualization, Cameron turns the slasher movie villain of the first film into a surrogate father. There's that haunting line Sarah Connor delivers while watching them together. The Terminator would never stop, it would never hurt him, never shout at him or get drunk and hit him, or say it was too busy to spend time with him. It would always be there and it would die to protect him. Of all the would-be fathers who came and went over the years, this machine was the only one who measured up. That is a heavy sentiment for a summer blockbuster. And we see Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor in fullness of her character. She's lean, she's mean, and she's arguably more terrifying than the machines. She's a woman who has seen the end of the world and is willing to become a monster herself to stop it. And for this, Linda got a cool $1 million, a fraction of Arnold's pay, but she gave the film its grit. Speaking of Arnold, let's look at the Arnold tax. He got $15 million for 700 words. That's roughly $21,000 per word. He also got a $40 million Gulfstream 3 jet as a thank you from the producer. If I were getting paid 20 grand every time I said I'll be back, I'd probably be a lot more forgiving toward the sequels too, but Arnold earned it here. He managed to portray a machine that learns without ever becoming too human. He stays a machine until the very end. Which brings us to the ending. T2 is a film about the triumph of the human will over predetermination. The first movie was about a closed loop, a fate you couldn't escape. T2 takes that loop and breaks it over its knee. No fate but what we make. By destroying every chip, every arm, and finally the T-800 itself, the movie tells us that the storm has been averted. It is a moment of absolute earned finality. Cameron actually filmed an alternative ending, the Skynet edition ending, where we see an elderly Sarah Connor in a peaceful 2029 watching her granddaughter play in a park, while John, now a US senator, works to make the world better. It's a bit syrupy, as Cameron later admitted, but it confirms the thematic goal. Skynet is dead. the war is over, and we won. But Hollywood hates a closed door. They see a perfect ending and think, yeah, but what if we open that door just a crack to see if any more money falls out? Every sequel that followed T2 is basically an insult to that finality. To make T3, Genisys, or Dark Fate work, the writers had to fundamentally spit in the face of T2. They had to say, actually, that sacrifice didn't matter. Fate is unavoidable. The thumbs up was just a temporary delay. By making Judgment Day inevitable, they rendered the struggle of the best film in the franchise pointless. They traded the soul of the story for a repetitive, good robot versus bad robot loop that has been spinning its wheels for 30 years. And it's the small things too, using twins like Linda's sister Leslie to play the T-1000 Sarah, or the twins at the hospital. It's the dog, Wolfie, James Cameron's actual dog by the way, being used as a plot point to sniff out the machine. It's the fact that the nuclear explosion scene was so realistic that scientists actually praised it. These aren't just cool facts for your IMDb trivia board, but symptoms of a director and a crew who were obsessed with making this world feel authentic. When you watch T2 today, you're watching the moment the Terminator franchise reached its logical conclusion. It's a film that demands you turn your brain on, even while you're shoving popcorn down your throat. It has layers, it has stakes, and most importantly, it has an ending. Or had. Putting Terminator Salvation at the number 2 spot is probably the most controversial move that I'll make in this video, but I just want you to hear me out. If you step back from the collective internet echo chamber for 5 seconds and look at this franchise through the lens of artistic intent rather than just, is Arnold in it, Salvation stands out as the only post-Cameron entry that actually had some goddamn balls. When Salvation dropped in 2009, all mauled it. Everyone called it soulless, robotic, and a Mad Max wannabe. It was a financial disappointment that effectively killed a planned trilogy. But here we are, 15 years later, looking back from the smoldering ruins of Genisys and Dark Fate, and suddenly Salvation looks like a masterpiece of restraint and originality. It is the ultimate diamond in the rough of a franchise that eventually traded its soul for nostalgia baiting. The reason Salvation works and why it deserves this spot is because it is the only sequel that didn't try to be Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Think about it. T3 was a cover band. Genisys was a confused fanfic. Dark Fate was a corporate remake. Salvation, on the other hand, did something radical. It moved the story forward. For the first time, we weren't stuck in a present-day chase scene involving a good robot protecting a kid from a bad robot. We weren't retreading the same streets of LA or hiding in the same desert shacks. We finally went to the one place the first 2 movies had been teasing for decades, the future war. James Cameron's future war was a blue-tinted, neon-lit nightmare of laser beams and chrome. Director MCG, the guy who brought us Charlie's Angels and whose filmography didn't exactly scream existential dread, actually made a smart choice here. He rejected the 80s aesthetic and gave us a future that felt industrial, dusty, and hostile. It's really Mad Max meets Black Hawk Down. The world of Salvation is bleached of color, covered in grit, and feels like a place where real people are actually struggling to survive. Grounded, tactile apocalypse. And a big part of that tactile feel comes from the late great Stan Winston. This was Winston's final project before he passed away in 2008, and the film is a fitting tribute to his legacy. MCG fought against the blue screen era and insisted on practical effects. They built full-size T600s, the rubber-skinned, clunky predecessors to the T800. These things are massive, terrifying, and look like they could actually crush a human ribcage. They even got designers from Ducati to help build the Moto Terminators. And what about John Connor? At the time, Christian Bale was the king of the world, the Batman, the intense method actor who would probably set himself on fire if the script asked for it. Initially, he was offered the role of Marcus Wright, the machine-human hybrid, but in a move of pure Bale-esque intensity, he insisted on playing John Connor. He wanted to be the legend. This led to massive script rewrites that arguably hurt the film's structure. Originally, John Connor was supposed to be a ghost, a voice on the radio, a figure we only see at the very end. By making him the lead, the film becomes a bit of a tug of war between this story and the much more interesting journey of Marcus Wright. But we can't talk about Salvation and Bale without mentioning the most viral thing that happened. I can accurately call it the Berserk Dark Knight on set. The legendary leaked audio of Christian Bale turning cinematographer Shane Hulbert into a verbal grease spot has become a more lasting legacy of this film than the actual plot. The reason? He walked into Bale's eyeline during an intense take. For a normal human being, that's a minor annoyance. For Bale, who was busy channeling the manic depressive paranoia of John Connor, it was an act of high treason. In that 3-minute tirade, the F word was deployed 39 times, an impressive statistic that would have given the film a hard R rating on its own, which is ironic considering the theatrical cut was as PG-13 as a Lego set. The most fascinating part of that rant is that Bale never actually broke character. You can hear him screaming in John Connor's raspy American growl, not his natural Welsh accent. He was so deep into the method that he was berating the crew as a resistance leader, not a Hollywood star. Bale later apologized on the radio, taking full responsibility, but when you watch him in the final movie, it feels like that cloud of misery never really lifted. He looks genuinely unhappy in every frame. He looks like a man who realized halfway through production that he had signed onto a project that was being focus grouped into oblivion by a studio that didn't understand the material. So for me, it was the face of a guy who realized his serious war movie was being turned into a generic summer blockbuster, and he was the only one left in the trenches actually giving a damn. And speaking of Marcus Wright, Sam Worthington, who got the job on a personal recommendation from James Cameron while they were filming Avatar. He actually delivers a solid performance here. He's the new element, a man who woke up in hell and realized he's becoming the very thing he's fighting right during his fights. It's an interesting philosophical hook. Can a machine have a soul? Can it choose to be human once the man inside it discovers that he is a machine? It's a direct callback to the no fate but what we make theme of T2, but explored from the inside out, from man to machine. And then there's Anton Yelchin as a young Kyle Reese, and rest in peace, man. Yelchin was the heart of this movie. He channeled Michael Biehn's intensity and vulnerability. Watching him navigate the ruins of LA as a scared but capable kid who would eventually grow up to save humanity is one of the few times this franchise has handled its own lore with genuine respect. But Salvation also was about the absolute chaos behind the scenes. This movie was forged in hell. You had a legal war over the rights to the franchise, with the Halcyon Company snatching them up and trying to force a new trilogy into existence. You had the 2008 writer's strike, which meant Jonathan Nolan, the guy who wrote The Dark Knight and Interstellar, had to leave the project halfway through. He was uncredited, but his DNA is all over the first half of the film. Overall tension on the set was so high that even people were breaking bones. Bale broke his hand. Worthington ruined his back. Michael Ironside, who plays one of the resistance leaders, literally couldn't sit down for the entire shoot because of a spinal injury. Like, this was literally a war zone. The biggest tragedy of Salvation, though, is what the studio did to it after the script leaked. The original ending was dark. I'm talking Terminator 1 levels of grim. In the original version, John Connor dies. To keep the symbol of the resistance alive, the resistance leaders decide to take Connor's skin and graft it onto Marcus Wright's endoskeleton. Marcus becomes the new John Connor, a literal machine disguised as a man, leading humanity against the machines. It was a bold, terrifying, and deeply Terminator irony. But the internet found out, the fans complained, and the studio got cold feet. They changed it to a safe Hallmark Channel heart transplant ending that makes absolutely zero medical or narrative sense. We're in a desert, but let's just swap hearts real quick. Like, it hurts. There's also the PG-13 problem. MCG has since admitted that there's a much darker R-rated director's cut out there. The theatrical version feels neutered, a war movie without the blood, a horror franchise without the teeth. It lacked the visceral punch that a story about human extinction requires. But even with the neutered rating and the messy third act, Salvation has an identity. It tried to expand the mythos. We see the T-600s with their rotting rubber skin. We see the harvesters that kidnap humans for their experimentation. We see Skynet not just as a red eye in a computer, but as a system that is actively evolving, using the likeness of Dr. Serena Kogan, which is played by Helena Bonham Carter, to communicate. It felt like a world that was actually growing, not just one that was repeating its greatest hits. And then there's the CGI Arnold, In 2009, this was a wow moment. Seeing the 1984 T-800 face on Roland Kickinger's body was a glimpse into the future of digital de-aging. Sure, it looks uncanny valley now, like a wax figure that started to melt, but in the context of the film, it worked. It was a bridge to the past, a reminder of what the Resistance was truly up against. Salvation didn't fail because it was bad. Not at all. It failed because it wasn't what the audiences thought they wanted. They wanted more "I'll be back." They wanted more "Hasta la vista." They wanted the comfort food of the 90s. But you can't have comfort food in a world where the machines have already won. It's a bleak, industrial, and deeply misunderstood entry that deserves your respect. It was the only time this franchise dared to stop looking over its shoulder and started looking at the horizon. And for that alone, it sits right behind the throne of James Cameron for me. Now, while I've spent a lot of time arguing that T2 is the peak of the franchise, there is a vocal contingent of fans, and I often find myself joining them at times, who believe the 1984 original is actually the superior film. Why? Because of its purity. There is no bloat here. No family-friendly softening of the edges, no $15 million paychecks for 7,000 words. There is only a $6.4 million budget and a young James Cameron with a chip on his shoulder and a camera in his hand, trying to prove that he wasn't just the guy who got fired from Piranha 2: The Spawning. The original Terminator is a masterclass in tech noir, a term Cameron actually coined himself. It's a midnight slasher movie disguised as a time travel epic. If you strip away the cyborgs and the laser beams, what you're left with is a classic 80s horror structure. The Terminator here is an unstoppable force of nature, a high-tech Michael Myers. He doesn't make quips, he doesn't wear funny sunglasses as a joke, he is a dead-eyed mechanism that will walk through a hail of bullets just to reach its target. The atmosphere of this film makes this movie very special. It's Los Angeles and it is shown in a very claustrophobic way. It's all nighttime, cold blue neon, and oily puddles. This is the LA of the disenfranchised, where waitresses with big hair and bad boyfriends are suddenly hunted by things they can't even begin to comprehend. Sarah Connor is not yet a warrior here. She's a final girl. She's ordinary, she's terrified, and she's out of her depth. This makes her journey much more visceral than her transformation in T2. In T2, she's a legend. In 1984, she's just a girl trying to survive a Friday night that turned into the apocalypse. The genius of the 1984 film is its simplicity. One unstoppable force, one ordinary person, one relentless chase. The ultimate run-and-gun movie, because the budget was so minuscule. Cameron and his crew had to resort to what we call guerrilla filmmaking. They didn't have permits for half the locations, so they'd pull up to a street, jump out of a van, shoot the scene before the cops showed up, and vanish. That energy is baked into the film's DNA. It feels frantic because it was frantic. Technically, the film is a testament to what you can do when you have a $6 million budget and the mind of a genius. Cameron used every trick in the textbook: miniatures, rear projection, and forced perspective. He made that $6 million look like $60 million. And yes, while we're being analytical, we have to admit that time has caught up with some of the effects here. The stop motion endoskeleton at the end, jerky and stuttery, but I'll take that jerky stop motion over weightless digital pixels any day of the week. Arnold Schwarzenegger's performance in this movie is the foundation of his entire career. In the sequels, the Terminator became a hero, a protector, almost a mascot. But in 1984, Arnold was genuinely unsettling. His massive industrial frame wasn't meant to be cool, it was meant to be imposing. He was a machine disguised as a man, and the disguise was barely holding together. Stan Winston's practical makeup, the exposed metal, the dead eye highlighted the uncanny valley of the character. Arnold just needed to, well, not act. He was a mechanism, and that simplicity made him the most iconic villain of the decade. Then there's Michael Biehn as Kyle Reese. He is malnourished, traumatized, and sweating with the desperation of a man who knows he is the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. His chemistry with Linda Hamilton is touching. It's not an ordinary Hollywood romance, it's a trauma bond formed in the middle of a war zone. When Reese talks about the future, the strength, and the fear, you believe every word he says because you can see the ghosts in his eyes. He is a soldier who has lived his entire life in the dirt, and his sacrifice at the end feels earned and devastating. The narrative structure of the Terminator is arguably the most perfect closed loop in movie history. It's a casualty loop that defines the franchise's tragedy. Skynet sends a Terminator back to kill John Connor's mother, but in doing so, it forces John to send his own father back in time to save her. The very act of Skynet trying to prevent its own destruction is the reason it exists in the first place. The arm and the chip found at the end of the movie are the blueprints for Skynet. It is a snake eating its own tail. The concept is razor sharp. It suggests a destiny that is written in stone, a fatalism that gives the film its tech-noir grit. It's the exact opposite of the no fate but what we make theme of T2. While I love the optimism of the sequel, there is something deeply profound about the original's insistence that the storm is coming no matter what you do. It gives the film a weight that the studio-approved fanfic of the later sequels could never replicate. However, because I'm not blinded by pure nostalgia, I have to acknowledge how the film has aged. Some of the everyday details of the 80s, the phone booths, the checkbooks, the big hair waitresses, give the movie a distinctly retro-futuristic vibe. To a modern viewer raised on iPhones and all, the pacing might feel a little slower than a modern Fast and Furious sensory overload fest. But the pacing of the Terminator is actually impeccable. It's a 107-minute clock that never stops ticking. There is no fat on this bone. Every scene either builds the world, raises the stakes, or pushes the chase forward. The original film is conceptually sharper than its sequels. It doesn't rely on nostalgia baiting because it is the nostalgia. It doesn't need cameo simulators because every character is vital to the moment. The movie is aged technically, but ideologically it remains as relevant as ever. The fear of artificial intelligence, of a machine that can't be reasoned with, can't be bargained with, and won't stop until you're dead. It's more real in 2026 than it was in 1984. So we've reached the midpoint of the ranking, and this is where the air starts to get a little thin. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is a film that exists in a state of permanent cinematic purgatory. It's not a masterpiece like the first two, but it's not the radioactive corporate sludge of the later entries. Released in 2003, T3 was the first time the franchise was handed over to someone who wasn't James Cameron. Jonathan Mostow took the wheel, and he did exactly what a competent Hollywood director does. He looked at both films in the series and decided to make a carbon copy of it. Terminator 3 is, for all intents and purposes, a Terminator factory line repackaging of T2. Skynet sends an advanced Terminator to kill John Connor. The Resistance sends a reprogrammed T-800 to protect him. They meet in a public place, there's a massive vehicle chase, they hide in a remote location, and they have a final showdown in a concrete industrial facility. It's the same movie, just with a fresh coat of paint and a significantly higher cringe factor. The biggest problem with T3 is that it suffers from what I can call mascot syndrome. In the first film, Arnold was a monster. In the second, he was a protector. By the third, he had become a mascot. The film treats the T-850 like a celebrity making a guest appearance. Every iconic moment is an echo. He arrives naked in a bar. Check. He steals a vehicle. Check. He puts on sunglasses. Check. The sunglasses. In T2, Arnold puts on the shades and it's a moment of cool machine-like efficiency. In T3, he walks into a ladies' night at a strip club, finds a pair of star-shaped Elton John glasses, puts them on, looks in the mirror, and the movie waits for a laugh. This is the exact moment the franchise started to rot. This is Marvel humor before Marvel even existed. The need to undercut every moment of tension with a goofy quip because the studio is afraid the audience might actually take the threat seriously. It turns a tech-noir horror action hybrid into a self-parody. You can practically hear the executives in the boardroom saying, "Kids love catchphrases. Let's give the robot a catchphrase about hands." Technically, the film is a fascinating transition point. We moved from the practical effect wizardry of Stan Winston to the digital dominance of industrial light and magic. And while the CGI is competent for 2003, it lacks the visceral weight of Cameron's work. The TX, played by Kristanna Loken, is the perfect example of cosmetic evolution. She's the T-1000 but with a flamethrower and a better haircut. She lacks the shark-like, unnerving presence of Robert Patrick. Robert Patrick didn't need a built-in plasma cannon to be scary. He just needed to look at you. The TX feels like a video game boss, visually impressive, but lacking the physicality that makes you fear for the protagonist's lives. That said, Mostow did deliver one of the greatest action sequences in the entire franchise, the crane chase. If you haven't seen it in a while, go back and watch it. It is a masterpiece of practical stunt work. A massive mobile crane being dragged through the streets of LA, tearing through buildings, flipping cars, and swinging the Terminator like a wrecking ball. This here is where T3 shines, when it stops trying to be funny and just focuses on the raw crunching physics of heavy machinery. In an era where modern sequels would just render that entire scene in a weightless digital soup, the crane chase has heft. Even considering the fact that this scene literally replicates the chase scene from T2 in many ways, it is still a hell of a spectacle. But once the crane stops moving, we're back to a narrative that feels like it's struggling to justify its own existence. Nick Stahl's John Connor is a far cry from the legend we were promised. He's a guy living off the grid, struggling with his destiny, which is a fine concept, but the chemistry just isn't there. He spends the movie being dragged along by Claire Danes, who is a fantastic actress, but she's given very little to do besides look worried. And the film makes the bizarre mistake of having John treat his new T850 as if it's the same father figure from T2. It's not. It's a different machine. By trying to force that emotional connection, the movie highlights how much it misses the organic growth of the previous film. And then there's the bathroom fight. If T2 had the epic scale of a steel mill, T3 has a brawl in a public restroom. They're smashing sinks, they're hitting each other with toilet seats. It's small, it's messy, and it feels like a step backward. Emblematic of the whole movie, bigger isn't always better, but smaller and goofier is definitely worse. However, I have to give Terminator 3 credit for the one thing it got absolutely 100% right: the ending. The ending of Rise of the Machines is one of the reasons this movie isn't at the very bottom of the list. After 2 hours of repetitive action, the film pulls a massive thematic U-turn. We spend the whole movie thinking we're going to stop Skynet. We reach the Crystal Peak bunker thinking there's a core to destroy, and then the doors close. There is no core. There is no Skynet central processor. Skynet is a software. It's in the wires. It's everywhere. The realization on John's face that Judgment Day wasn't stopped, it was just postponed, is a genuine chilling moment of tech noir fatalism. The missile launches, the world ends, and our heroes are stuck in a cold 1950s era fallout shelter, realizing that their destiny wasn't to save the world, but simply to survive long enough to watch it burn. It is a bold, dark, and deeply poetic conclusion that effectively spits in the face of T2's optimism, but does so with a sense of unavoidable tragedy that feels like it belongs in the original 1984 film. It's the one time T3 stops being a cover band and starts singing its own haunting melody. If the whole movie had been as daring as the last 10 minutes, it might have actually rivaled the originals. But a great ending can't fully fix a mediocre middle. Terminator 3 is a film that feels sterile and lacks the blue noir soul of James Cameron. Mosto's LA is too bright, too sunny, too much like a generic television set. It doesn't have the oily, grimy nighttime atmosphere that defines the Terminator universe. It feels like a safe summer blockbuster designed to move toys and soundtracks rather than a visceral exploration of the end of the human race. The tragedy of Terminator 3 is that it proved the franchise could be competent without being good. It established the formula that every subsequent failure would follow. Bring back Arnold, introduce a shiny new robot, make some jokes about the old movies, and hope the action scenes distract the audience from the fact that we have absolutely nothing new to say. And surprisingly, there is nothing to say even if it is the movie where James Cameron finally returned as a producer. Even if it's a movie that brought back Linda Hamilton. This was the one that promised to erase the bad dreams of T3, Salvation, and Genisys and give us the real third chapter we've been waiting for since 1991. And yet, here it is, sitting at number 5, because for all its posturing about being bold and new, Dark Fate is essentially a corporate-approved fanfic that is so terrified to do anything except repeat the plot of Terminator 2 with a fresh coat of modern Hollywood paint. The film begins with a literal slap in the face, using the same de-aging technology that made the T2 cast look like they'd been plucked out of a time capsule from 1991. We see a young Sarah and John Connor relaxing on a beach in Mexico. It's the victory lap. We're being reminded that they stopped Judgment Day. And then, a stray T-800 walks up and shoots John Connor in the chest. Dead. Just like that. Now, I understand the intent here. The writers wanted to shock us. They wanted to pull an Alien 3 and tell us that the Chosen One narrative was over and that this time the stakes were different. But by killing John Connor in the first 5 minutes, they rendered the entire emotional journey and the ultimate sacrifice of T2 completely and utterly pointless. If John dies 5 minutes after the thumb goes up in the molten steel, then the T-800 died for nothing. Sarah Connor's madness was for nothing. The entire struggle was just a temporary delay for a different kid to take his place. It's a cynical move that trades thematic depth for a shocker moment, and the movie never quite recovers from it. From there, Dark Fate devolves into a structural find and replace job. Skynet is gone, but now we have Legion. It's the same thing, just with a more Silicon Valley name. John Connor is gone, but now we have Danny Ramos. She is the new savior of humanity. Except, spoiler alert, the movie tries to subvert expectations by revealing she's not the mother of the leader, but the leader herself. This would be a great twist if Danny Ramos had even an ounce of the charisma or complexity that Edward Furlong's John Connor had. Instead, she's a blank slate. She's a placeholder in a script that is so busy nostalgia baiting with the old cast that it forgets to make us care about the new one. However, if there is a diamond in the rough, it's Mackenzie Davis as Grace. For all my grumbling, the concept of an enhanced human is not a bad idea, and it's probably the best idea since Salvation. Grace is a soldier who volunteered to be surgically upgraded. She's faster, she's stronger, but she has a human heart and a human metabolism. She needs medications to keep her body from shutting down. She has a clock. This gives her character a sense of vulnerability and visceral weight that the Terminators usually lack. Mackenzie Davis puts in the work too. She looks like a soldier. She moves with a frantic, desperate intensity that feels like it belongs in the original 1984 film. For a brief moment during the highway chase in Mexico, you almost feel like you're watching a real Terminator movie. But then old man Carl shows up. I can just see the boardroom meeting now. We have Arnold, but we can't make him a killer and we can't make him a protector again because that's boring. So what if he's a drapery salesman? Yes, the T-800 who killed John Connor apparently developed a conscience over 20 years. He moved to the suburbs, married a woman with a kid, and started a small business hanging curtains. He even boasts about how he's a very good drapery salesman because he has an eye for color and texture. Look, for sure, I love Arnold. He's the soul of this franchise, but this is the Disneyfication I was talking about earlier. It's Marvel-style humor injected into a world that should be defined by dread. The moment you turn the ultimate killing machine into a domesticated dad who worries about his wife's feelings and his carpet samples, you have officially killed the tech-noir soul of the series. The humor is too broad, the irony is too thick, and it turns the Terminator into a caricature of himself. It's hard to feel existential dread when the robot meant to represent the end of the world is busy explaining the benefits of blackout curtains. Then we have the Rev 9, played by Gabriel Luna. He's a liquid metal over an endoskeleton hybrid. His big trick is that he can split into two autonomous parts, a solid skeleton and a liquid shadow. Visually, it's cool for about the first 5 minutes, but as a threat, he lacks the shark-like efficiency of Robert Patrick or the industrial heft of Arnold. He's too smooth, too perfect, and he suffers from the Marvelization of action where he can take infinite damage without ever feeling like he's in real trouble. There is no friction. When the Rev 9 gets hit, it just looks like a well-rendered digital effect. The action itself is competent, but it feels sterile. The airplane sequence when they're fighting in zero-G inside a crashing transport plane is a technical marvel, but it's so over the top that it loses all sense of reality. It's spectacle for the sake of spectacle. It lacks the weight of the T3 crane chase and for sure the T2 canal chase. But what about Sarah Connor? Linda Hamilton returns and she is easily the best thing in the movie. She looks like she's spent the last 20 years eating cigarettes and drinking gasoline. She's grizzled, angry, and she has some of the best lines in the film. But even she is hamstrung by a script that doesn't know what to do with her. She's a cameo simulator lead. She's there to remind you of a better movie while she stands in the background of a worse one. Her arc, learning to trust a machine again, is just a retread of her arc from T2, but without the organic emotional growth. By the time the final battle happens in a, you guessed it, hydroelectric dam, the new concrete industrial facility, you've seen it all before. The sacrifice at the end, the passing of the torch to Danny, it feels hollow. It lacks the human heart that made Salvation's attempt at a future war feel like it actually had stakes. Dark Fate isn't a disaster in the way the next movie on our list is, but it's something arguably worse. It's forgettable. It's a corporate compromise that tried to clean up the timeline, but only succeeded in making the entire franchise feel like a series of alternate universe DLCs that you can pretend don't exist. It's a film that respects the icons, but fundamentally misunderstands the themes. It thinks that because it has Sarah Connor and a T-800, it's a Terminator movie. But a Terminator movie isn't about leather jackets and sunglasses. It's about choice, consequence, and the terrifying realization that we are the architects of our own destruction. So while it's technically better than the confused mess we're about to talk about, Dark Fate represents the final gasping breath of the franchise's attempt to stay relevant by looking backward. It's the legacy sequel that proved that sometimes the bad dreams are better than the woke up reality. So we have finally reached the bottom of the barrel. The radioactive core of the meltdown, the cinematic equivalent of a blue screen of death. Terminator Genisys is an arrogant, confused, and actively hostile disaster that treats the audience like they have the memory of a goldfish and the critical thinking skills of a toaster. Realized in 2015, Genisys arrived in an era where every studio was desperate to marvelize their IPs, to turn everything into a quip-heavy, metatextual, multiverse-spanning content factory. And Genisys is the absolute worst version of that impulse. It's a movie that fails to understand why the original stories were good in the first place. The central problem of Genisys is its sheer unearned arrogance. The film assumes that complexity equals intelligence. It thinks that if it layers enough timelines, alternate histories, and shocker reversals on top of each other, it'll somehow transcend the slasher roots of the original. But it's all smoke and mirrors. The movie opens with a massive 20-minute exposition dump, a dizzying montage of the future war that feels like a trailer for a movie that we'll never get to see. It's a frantic sensory overload mess that doesn't give you a single second to emotionally attach to the characters. Casting decisions here are just awful as well. If you want to see a charisma vacuum in action, look no further than Jai Courtney as Kyle Reese. Michael Bihn's Kyle Reese was a starving, traumatized animal, a man who lived in the dirt and breathed fear. Jai Courtney's Kyle Reese looks like he just walked out of a CrossFit gym and a teeth whitening session. He is bland, he is uninteresting, and has zero chemistry with Emilia Clarke's Sarah Connor. And speaking of Emilia Clarke, listen, I love her in Game of Thrones, but as Sarah Connor, she's essentially playing Diet Sarah. She's doing a Linda Hamilton cosplay without any of the grit, the trauma, or the visceral tech-noir soul that makes the character work. She's too polished and looks like she's in a high-budget school play. When she delivers the line, "Come with me if you want to live," it feels like a rehearsed line for a cameo simulator. The film then takes us back to 1984, but it's a reimagined 1984. We see a frame-by-frame CGI recreation of the original film's punk scene, with a digital 1984 Arnold fighting a real 2015 Arnold. Visually, it's impressive in a deepfake museum kind of way, but narratively, it's hollow. It tells the audience, remember that movie you actually liked? Here's a shiny digital version of it, but with more quips. This is where the movie introduces Pops, the T-800 who has been Sarah's guardian since she was a child. Arnold is genuinely the best thing in this movie. He's the only one who seems to be having a good time, leaning into the self-parody and the old but not obsolete mantra. But the Pops relationship is just a way too simplified version of the father-son bond in T2. It's played for laughs. The Arnold smiling gag is the talk to the hand of this movie, and it completely removes the threat. If Sarah Connor has a pet Terminator protecting her since she was 9, then where is the danger? Where is the tech-noir dread? It's gone, replaced by a Marvel-light family dynamic that belongs in a sitcom, not a Terminator film. The middle act of Genisys is also a structural nightmare. The movie literally reboots itself halfway through. After winning in 1984, the characters decide they need to jump forward to 2017 to stop an app called Genisys, which is just Skynet on an iPad. So the movie just stops, resets, and forces us to start over in a different time period. It destroys any sense of narrative momentum. It's like watching a movie that keeps hitting the skip button on its own plot because the writers couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap naturally. And then we have the John Connor twist. In a move of spectacular marketing incompetence, the studio decided to put the biggest spoiler in the history of the franchise right in the trailer. John Connor is a Terminator. He's been infected by nano turbo machines and turned into the villain. Now, imagine if the T2 trailer had shown the T-800 saving John in the hallway. It would have killed the suspense. Genisys does the same thing, but worse. It takes the one potentially interesting idea, the corruption of the human leader, and strips it of all emotional weight by revealing it 3 months before the movie even came out. Jason Clarke as John Connor is fine, but as a villain, he's just a digital dust monster. He fights with weightless particles. He survives everything. He's the peak of CGI-infused vomit, where characters just hit each other with pixels until the audience gets bored and checks their phone. But the biggest sin of Genisys is the timeline logic. Overcomplicated, incoherent, and arrogant. The film introduces nexus points, alternate memories, and multiple Skynet incarnations without ever explaining the basics. Who sent Pops back to Sarah's childhood? The movie literally has a line where Arnold says the information was deleted from his memory files. Let that sink in. The central mystery of the film, the catalyst for the entire reimagining, is hand-waved away by a script that was too lazy to come up with an answer. Don't worry about the logic, look at the big magnetic machine. It's insulting. It's the arrogance of believing you can overwrite James Cameron's perfection while being too incompetent to follow your own internal rules. By the time we get to the final battle, another concrete industrial facility of course, the movie has completely lost its identity. It's no longer a Terminator movie, but a generic $200 million spectacle-heavy nothing burger. The Genisys app is about to launch, the T-3000 is throwing people through walls, and Arnold is making "I'll be back" jokes. It's a genuine parody. The movie ends with Arnold's Pops being upgraded to liquid metal, the T-1000 upgrade, completely removing the one thing that makes the T-800 cool, its industrial, clunky, mechanical vulnerability. Now, he's a superhero. Now, he's invincible. Genisys is the point of no return. It's the film that effectively broke the loop of the franchise, but in the worst way possible. It turned the Terminator into content. It created the choice versus destiny themes for Timeline A versus Timeline B logic puzzles. It replaced the human heart of Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor with bland, well-lit actors who look like they're waiting for their Starbucks order. So, here we are. We've traveled from the molten steel-soaked heights of Terminator 2, a film that remains the undisputed king of action cinema, all the way down to the radioactive, focus-grouped sewer that is Terminator Genisys. It's been a journey through the very best and the very worst of what Hollywood is capable of. And as I sit here reflecting on these 6 films, I'm struck by a singular, depressing realization. The Terminator franchise didn't die because audiences lost interest in killer robots or time-traveling paradoxes. It died because it refused to accept its own ending. The Terminator saga is the ultimate victim of its own success. James Cameron gave us a definitive conclusion in 1991. He told us that the storm was over, the future wasn't set, and that humanity had won. But in the eyes of a studio executive, a perfect ending isn't a victory. It's an obstacle to the next fiscal quarter. What we've seen over the last 30 years is a franchise rotting inside a modular mindset. The post-Cameron Terminator films are the assembled products. It's IKEA-style filmmaking, pre-cut parts, familiar instructions, and the comforting illusion that you're building something new. Rearrange the same pieces, slap a different name on the box, and call it innovation. Every sequel, Salvation aside, has been built from the exact same kit. A time travel incursion, a messianic savior, a good protector machine, a shinier villain model, and an industrial warehouse finale. The pieces click together easily because they've been used so many times before. What you end up with is an evolution, it's self-cannibalization masquerading as progress. And that digital sterility that has sucked the soul out of this world. We've spent this whole video praising Stan Winston, and for good reason. In the 80s and early 90s, the imperfections of animatronics gave the machines a physical, terrifying weight. Modern CGI has made these machines too fluid, too weightless. When a Terminator in Dark Fate or Genisys gets hit, it feels like a glitch in a video game. Hollywood became the very thing it warned us about. A machine that doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop ever until it has milked your favorite IP to death. Reminds you of the original Terminator, doesn't it? They used Arnold and Linda Hamilton like shiny objects waved in front of a cat, hoping that if we saw the iconic faces, we wouldn't notice knows that the script was a confused mess of timeline erasing nonsense. So, is there a future for the Terminator? Honestly, I think the most merciful thing we can do is let it die. This story has been told to death. We've seen every possible variation of the chase through LA and the desert hideout. If the franchise is going to continue, it needs to commit the ultimate sacrilege. It needs to ditch the Connors, ditch the leather jackets, and ditch the face of Arnold Schwarzenegger. We need a radical shift. Give us a movie from the perspective of a machine developing a soul in the middle of a war it doesn't understand. Give us a horror film set entirely in the future ruins where humans are the monsters hunting machines. Just give us something that isn't a legacy sequel do-over of a 30-year-old masterpiece. But let's be real, they won't do that. They'll wait 5 years, they'll hire a new visionary director, and try to convince us that this time it's the real sequel to T2. They'll keep trying to fix the past because they're terrified of the future. The Terminator franchise has become its own casualty loop. It's trapped in an endless cycle of its own history, constantly trying to prevent its own downfall, but only succeeding in making it more inevitable. And maybe that's the most authentic ending possible for a series about the dangers of messing with time. So I want to thank you for sticking with me through this 40-odd minute descent into madness. If you enjoyed this deep dive, or if you would just enjoy watching a pretentious knob like me rant about digital pixels and curtain-selling robots, then please hit that subscribe button. Check out the other videos on the channel and let me know in the comments which Terminator sequel is your guilty pleasure, and which one makes you want to delete your own memory files. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.